Hi, I'm Elsa Ramo, and you're listening to In Her Words.
We are speaking to Elsa Ramo, who is the founder and managing partner of her own boutique firm, Ramo Law. She has offices in California and New York. She has been working in entertainment law for up to 20 years. She represents clients in all aspects of content, so the films, nonfiction, television series, podcasts, audio, branded content, and more. She gives some really amazing practical advice. She's had such an interesting path, and beyond that, she's very cool to talk to. So Gretchen and I had a blast talking to her today. So we hope you enjoy listening and just check her out. She has some really great practical advice, especially for those who are starting out with their projects. Happy listening. We're excited to have you on just because I know that you've had such an incredible reputation as a hustler. You know, you hung your own shingle, you've built an incredible empire in and of itself. And, you know, you've touched on so many different projects. We'd love to kind of, you know, just dive right in terms of just hearing a little bit about your story.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast. It's funny because we rescheduled, so it's been great to kind of hear all these other women, and I love what you guys are doing, and it's great.
Thank you.
It's like the positive, happy version of the town with like more of a female point of view. So it's great.
Oh, thank you.
So in terms of me and my origination story, I guess, if you will, I graduated law school at a very young age and had all the desire in the world to be an entertainment lawyer without any real path or in, if you will. And I was young enough and maybe a little bit naive enough to just kind of be brave and kind of take any opportunity as it came. And when I first moved to Los Angeles, I was working for a royalty litigation firm, just kind of doing clerk work. And through a series of fortunate events, my friends were working at the Universal Studios backlot, and it was the summer of 2005, and they kind of gave me a hookup to have a trailer on the backlot. And at the time, it was owned by GE. And GE wrote a letter authorizing Elsa Ramo to practice law on the backlot. And so I had a spot and a trailer. I didn't have a bathroom or a golf cart. And it's like, you know, timing is everything. And the interesting, inciting factor was that when I moved onto the backlot in like the early spring of 2005, it just so happened that you could make a movie on digital instead of 35 millimeter. Mm-hmm. And the most relevant thing about that was that there was a bunch of kids that just graduated from film school or had like $100,000 and could make a horror movie for that amount because they didn't have to pay for 35 millimeter. And I just happened to be the girl on the backlot in the trailer that would do their legal work for nothing. So it's, you know, you talk about being prepared for the opportunity when it arrives. I didn't quite appreciate that that was an opportunity inflection point, other than I would get these like young producers knocking on my trailer, hearing that I could do legal work. And that's literally how I started my law practice. And it was amazing because it was a lot of young people that also had like this great opportunity to make something for nothing. And the traditional sort of big law firms, it wasn't scalable. Like you couldn't afford a real lawyer. So I was sort of this opportunity point. And, you know, I would go to set and like see my clients making these tiny movies, and they would actually sell them for a profit. And that sort of like summer was my apprenticeship. Like I had to kind of figure out everything for the very first time. And a lot of those clients that I made movies with in that summer have now had an entire 20-year career alongside me. And so it's been great to watch them change and pivot, but it really is, the only way that I could have started was to just kind of do it. And at the time, Kinko still existed, and I printed out cards that said entertainmentattorney.biz, and off I went. And it really, like, I had no choice but to learn how to do everything because I wasn't working for anyone other than myself. And I just kind of figured it out. It was a great way to start. And I think in this industry, that tenacity and not being scared of changing technology or evolution and how content is consumed has like really informed the culture of my firm and what I've done and how I've been able to pivot from nonfiction to now, you know, UGC content. It's just everything is always changing, and I'm okay with that because that's kind of how I started.
Do you remember a day when you were on the lot that somebody came to you and you were like, okay, this is like, what was a point where you had to figure it out, where it wasn't just like, I'm heads down, I'm going to help these guys, but like, at what point were you like, I'm going to hang my shingle?
I think it was before I moved to the back lot. I am a first generation Syrian American. My dad always had his own business. So I was unafraid about the idea of starting a business like that. I had no fear or trepidation about that. I think what gave me the courage to act as if was, I understood what I didn't know, and I was okay to say to people like, I don't really understand this, or I don't know what it is, and I kind of made an agreement with myself to figure it out come hell or high water.
Okay.
But the sort of like, this is real, and it's not just my mom used to get really mad at me when I first started. She'd be like, this is not the Barbie game. You can't just dress up and be a lawyer. I was like, no, mom, I think this is like real. Like, I'm doing it. And like, she was very like reluctant to believe that like I was capable of doing it. And she was right. Like, in some respects, I was acting as if, but that first summer, like, one of the very first things that happened was I had to like fire a director on a movie, and I was 24.
Oh my
And
gosh.
as I was walking up to the set trying to do this, and it's like a baby set, but it's still real. Like, it occurred to me that I had a responsibility. People perceived me in a way where I was a lawyer dealing with real things in a real situation. And being able to handle and navigate that, I realized like I could handle what's in front of me. And this is something that I can do, and it's unique to me. And um, representing producers is like the most entrepreneurial thing you could do in the entertainment industry. So that part always resonated with me. Like, my dad owning his dental office was the same as the producer trying to make the movie. And like, as I saw the synergies of like what I grew up in to what being a producer really meant, especially in our industry, it like, I felt like I was a good voice and a good advocate for somebody trying to do that. And it just like, it really, that summer made me realize like, this is something I am actually good at, and not just right time, right place.
And what was the going even back further to the beginning of your story? What was the attraction to the entertainment industry? I thought you were going to say that that was your dad's business, but he was a dentist.
Yeah.
What was the attraction to the entertainment? Was it just living in growing up in LA, or was how did you get to that spot?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I didn't want to be a dentist. So, like, anything that wasn't that, I was happy to do. That was like a gatekeeping threshold thing. I grew up in San Diego, and so I always grew up loving movies and TV shows, and like, it just like, I was enamored by the idea of what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated creativity. I was like a bookworm, like all the things. And when I went to law school, the idea of like representing somebody in an accident or doing tort law, it just felt like there has to be more to life than this. And in law school, I started to come to LA more and hanging out with people that were making movies and things. And I just felt like taking my law degree and applying it to something that I was like truly passionate about was just a perfect alignment. And I didn't know how I could possibly get in because, when you're in law school, they tell you you can't be an entertainment lawyer. That just doesn't happen. Like, you kind of have to know someone or have to go do something else first. And I just felt like my path had to be to advocate for creativity. And like that, even at a young age in my career starting out, I understood that you just do more when you care more. And so I just felt like I had to somehow insert myself into this world and space.
Also, it's like you've been around for, many years in terms of just watching that from the beginning of your career to where we are now. What are the biggest changes you found in terms of representing producers? Like, how has that shifted in terms of, the issues they were facing when you first started to where they are now? It's like, whether it be streaming, contracts, AI, like what are you finding to be the things that you're navigating that are really shifting the industry forward?
I think for the duration of my career, which is now almost 20 years, which is scary to say, there's been three sort of like seismic shifting factors that have impacted, I think, the life of a producer, but also the life of a creator in the industry. One is, I sort of jokingly say BW and AW, before Weinstein and after Weinstein. Like, I started in a time where it wasn't like women weren't necessarily given fair treatment. There was a lot of imposition and gender bias and not the best situations to be in. Like it just existed and you sort of take it as if. And so to be at an inflection point in my career where when the Weinstein thing came out, there was sort of a reset and a recalibration in how people treat each other, that changed my career and perception about who I am and what my law firm is. It was, I just felt like I was given more opportunity and more equalness. And to some extent, it felt like a friction point because I felt like someone was checking off the box to give me consideration, but I'll take it, right? Because it's maybe a retrade. But I also think I felt that for my clients who I represent a lot of women, people of color, diverse producers. And I felt like it was like a portal that opened over the course of my career. And that, diversity factor is something that just was completely non-existent when I started. And now it's a consideration and it's a way in which producers can navigate and they can tell stories of different races and backgrounds and sexual orientation. Like all of that feels like a shift that I experienced from start to finish. Like I feel like I came across that point. I think the other big inflection point for a producer is that the idea of nonfiction content has completely become something totally other than, when I started, there was reality shows and there was independent film, and there wasn't this like weird in between that nonfiction has become. And it's such a currency in the streamer world. And a lot of my clients who started out in independent film and sort of prescribed to live a life where they were never going to make money, but be at Sundance every other year. It sort of has converted to a much more sophisticated business and the thing that's interesting about nonfiction is nonfiction sort of embraces the cultural zeitgeist at the time, and we tell a million stories in that domain. So like right now it's all about sports nonfiction. And so like my world is very much enveloped in that. And so I think the opportunity for true auteurs, true filmmakers, true content creators to utilize nonfiction has been something that, again, was non-existent, is now completely existent from a producer point of view. And a lot of my clients have converted and they're kind of only doing nonfiction and never going back. Like they sort of like have no missing of making a low budget movie. And then I think the third is happening right now, which is really interesting because I've sort of been through two other major shifts. And I guess as you get older, you kind of know it when you see it. And actually, it's less about the decline of film and television production. That contraction is inevitable. But the reason why is that sort of short form and user generated content is how content now is preferred to be consumed by the average person. And I think the actual shift and evolution of that in the entertainment industry is in process. And I think people are, I think we sort of are having a mass experience because the pandemic happened. And so everything was because of the pandemic. The strike happened last year and everything was because of the strike. I think those are symptoms, but I think there's a much bigger shift in transgression occurring in our industry. And I can feel that occurrence happening. And it's interesting to be a part of the conversation and watching things like independent film, wind down. I wouldn't say completely go out of nowhere, and theatrical business realize what they are. And so that experience I'm having is one right now that I'm sharing with a lot of my producer clients. And I think it's at the moment it's inconclusive. We're on this journey together, and I don't know exactly where we're going, but we're not there yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting.
Do you think that Renee and I, we were just talking about some of these things that especially the contraction of the industry and all of these different genres really kind of having their moment in the sun. Do you think that as the ship kind of rights and things settle, that they all stay, that we have, like you said, more nonfiction, we have more sports, we have more documentaries, we have more, and then there's still independent film, and then there's still big block. Do you think that there's, do you see that there's a place for everything, as we may go far left and then far right, but then we kind of find our way in the middle, and there's a place for everything?
I think that the doom and gloom is a cyclical phenomenon. Like things are always bad and always good. And so to that extent, like I don't think everything is going away, but I do not believe that everything will remain the same. And so I sort of, I have younger people working for me in their 20s, and like they don't really understand the heyday of independent film and when you could make a ton of money for making it. Like,
Yeah.
it's sort of like folklore at this point. And so I think I sort of akin it to like, is opera still around? Yeah,
Yeah.
like opera's still
Yeah.
around. We go and watch it and enjoy it. But I'm sure like back when like, I don't know, Mozart was cool, everybody was listening to opera and it was like the thing. So I think that like, it's like, I don't necessarily think independent film is opera, but I don't think independent film is what it was going to be in the 80s or 90s when I
Right.
was growing up. And I don't necessarily think it's going to be the sustainable thing. And I think that kids that are going to USC film school, it'll be interesting if they still call it film school, right? Like I think that the young generation growing up are not necessarily going to prescribe to be a staff writer on a show. Like those things are on a bit of a contraction mode. And I think, but the thing that I have a belief in, right? Like you have to believe in something to like get up every morning and deal with the contraction and the volatility of the marketplace is I believe content will always be needed to be created, right? Like we always want to watch and listen to stuff. That's like an unequivocal truth. And so I'm not married to the idea of the things that we're doing now. It's like we're only going to the theater and going to watch a movie. We may have experiential things. I don't know. And so having the belief that no matter what, people want to watch things, and no matter what, there's like amazing, wonderful creators in this world. And some of them are writers and some of them are directors and some of them are influencers that are multi-hyphenates. Like that's exciting to me, but I don't necessarily think that there's room for everything to remain as it is.
Just, just going back to your story a little bit, and then we can continue on the path of the industry. You know, part of a large part of our community is just trying to figure out, when do you get representation? When do you really engage from a legal side? What does that look like? It would be helpful to kind of understand, and I think if we can impart some tactics or just some wisdom to our community who are all they run the gamut. So you're talking, they're writing pilots, they're writing books with hopes for book to screen. Like we cover the gamut. And I think in terms of just understanding the legal landscape, can you just give a little insight into how a creative, beyond the producer, but that you would recommend them thinking about, when to get a lawyer, when to get an agent, all of the different facets. Because I think the business side of the industry is a little bit more, I want to say, known but unknown for them. They always have those types of questions in terms of timing and when to take certain steps.
I think when you're starting out, you have to know enough to navigate through those questions, right? And so just like when you're a writer, you improve your craft and you understand how to write really well, you also need to have a very basic understanding of the business and sort of your rights under the business, right? And so content is a very interesting thing because from a legal perspective, particularly the content we live in, right? Like
Yeah.
audiovisual film is a collaborative effort. And so there's multiple cooks in the kitchen, and the idea of ownership and control and rights all get sort of thrown into a pot and stirred. And if you don't have really sage representation and safe protection, you could sort of get diminished or leveraged out or really taken advantage of. And so one is like education, I think is paramount. I think there's wonderful resources for babies as they're starting to figure it out. California Lawyers for the Arts is like an amazing nonprofit organization. They have a pro bono program where resources are available, even if it's just a gut check. Like you can't afford a lawyer, you don't really have a great agent, but how do you get the information? I feel like that's a great resource. Women in Film has a lot of programs and resources available. So part of it is like knowing where you're at and what you can truly like afford or what you have as a resource. And then I think it's about, when you're endeavoring to touch anyone else with your content, there is a legal repercussion to that. And so whether it's you co-write a script with somebody or you get money from someone to make a short or you are submitting and getting a development order from a network, all of those things have significant legal repercussions. Now, on one hand, it's only about that specific project. So if you make a bad deal, you make a bad deal. But on the other hand, you don't know like the impact and the reach of your project. So if you don't have proper representation, it could be catastrophic. Like if this is your Mickey Mouse and you just signed a work for hire, that's not a great thing. And there's no way to sort of put the genie back in the bottle. And so I think that I think I have found that the most successful producers I know and content creators, their longest relationship is with their lawyer. And I say that because lawyers understand to meet clients where they're at and where they're starting and can sort of size and scale that. And when it comes to management and agency representation, there's a little bit like you kind of don't want anyone that wants you when you're starting out. Like, not to be facetious, but there is a bit of that cycle. And
Yeah.
maybe you get really lucky and you're at Sundance and you run into like a hustler agent that recognizes it and they're on their way up and so are you, and that's great. But I think the agent management thing, they're also having a reset, right? And they're also very meticulous about who they're signing and why. And they also have finite resources. And with places like CA being more corporate and have being VC and, you know, like everyone has a bottom line. And so to get into that pipeline, I think is more challenging than it used to be. I think identifying a lawyer that, first of all, is akin to what you're making and like shares a value system and understands the world in which you're endeavoring to do is really important. And developing that relationship and finding someone just so that you have a place where you can ask the dumb questions. And like I always say to someone, it's too late if you're calling me and you've already signed something, right? Like I can't undo the signing. But if you're navigating in the world and workshopping and developing, you may not need full on legal representation. And if you need a gut check, there are resources available to people. And you have to treat it like your biggest asset is like the things that you are creating. And if you don't like have proper representation around that, you're sacrificing your entire livelihood, your book. Like you have to really treat it like the most valuable asset that you own.
With everything that's changing for the creators that you've just touched on, how have all of those platforms and all of those new ways to create, how has that changed things for you? Have you had to, keep learning, or are you hiring differently or bringing on different, partners and different people in your own firm to, you've mentioned the, the film festivals and getting there. You've mentioned podcasts, you've mentioned, the short forms, the YouTubes, and how has that changed what you need to do as a lawyer to keep representing your clients well?
It literally is something that impacts how I think and how I navigate with running a business every day, all day, right? Because you cannot be complacent about the book you have. And this is true of anyone in the service entertainment business in particular. Like you have to be observant as to what's happening in real time, but you also have to forecast and make decisions so that you're not the Titanic turning too late. So I am extremely cognizant of you can't just like listen to the industry talk about themselves. You have to like go into the world and hang out with your 11-year-old and see how they're watching content and sort of like have all these experiences and inform it to really represent people wholeheartedly and completely, and also really develop a team that is consistent with the type of representation that's needed. So I tell the young people that work for me, they have a better sense and understanding of AI and user generated content than I do. And so even though I may be a really good lawyer and navigate through the license agreement around it, their understanding of how and why the content is consumed and sort of the consumer experience is going to make me a better attorney. So I encourage and I really try to make sure that among our team, we're very conscientious of what's happening and why and what are we doing about it. And so like one of the simplest things is, you get into the rut of like, okay, we're going to go to like AFM and Toronto and Sundance. And like, that's where we need to be because that's where everybody is. And like this year, there were a couple times where I was like, wait a second, not everybody's at Toronto. People that are making independent film is at Toronto. What else is going on? Okay, well, the daytime, the Emmys are going on that weekend. We have clients that are nominated there. And you kind of have to like make concessions about things that you always did because you thought you had to do them to, well, where are people in the world and where are conversations going and what else do we need to be involved with and around? And you sort of can't take the way we do it for granted. Like you have to say, well, what else should we be doing? And And some things is trial and error. But I love the idea of things not be, I always tell people like the book that I have today is literally 80% different than it was 5 years ago. And I accept the fact that 5 years from now, it's going to be different. And that's an exciting journey, but something that if you're not constantly self-aware of, you are looking at yourself and saying, why are we doing so many less films? It's like, well, no, we know why. What else are we doing that's relevant? So
Interesting. Are you finding that, and obviously as somebody who started their own business, you had an interesting path to that, as you explained, but are you finding the path for, the gig economy has kind of hit so many industries. Are you finding more business folks, whether they're lawyers, there's kind of behemoths within Hollywood. Are you finding more people are hanging there, are doing more independent, more contracting work in terms of legal, or is the path is the legal path different? Like at one point you had to kind of go from small to big to, you kind of build up and then you start your own, I think that's kind of replicated across industry. Are you finding that path in the legal world to be changing in terms of how you hire, or are you finding, whether it's competition or so forth, that people aren't going through the kind of traditional channels to build their careers anymore? Or
I it's a very disruptive time in like legal and entertainment
yeah,
law because there is just a bloodbath of layoffs of people that did what they were supposed to do. Like they went to the big studio and they were there for 20
yeah,
years and they had a really nice title and probably like great working benefits that now 15, 20 years later no longer have a job and are a little bit boxed out of a transition in the same field and space and same
interesting.
price point. Um, I think that is further exasperated by the fact that, kind of post pandemic, there was like a major competition of hiring legal staff during the streaming wars. And so there was like, in my opinion, an unexplained market spike to pay for lawyers well above and beyond what they should be getting. And there were, because it was very competitive. And so like now that market correction is occurring.
Interesting.
And so in that sense, I do feel it's very cyclical. Like I think that like all of these out of work in-house lawyers are maybe more adept to doing their own thing or maybe going to a boutique firm or maybe doing adjacent things. Like I have
Yeah.
colleagues that are not doing like traditional film and TV, but they're doing theme parks, right? Like so they're sort of like understanding that the domain has expanded. I still think like big law is big law. And if you go to a fancy school and you're in the top thing, you go to the big law and like life is great and you work until you cry. Like that, I don't think that like trajectory is ever going to change. But
Okay.
I think that how the entertainment law business is generating income is changing. And, we made a strategic decision a decade ago to really focus on content. And we did not diverse and go into the talent business because it's a very different business model. I'm curious to see how the traditional talent model changes, right? Because that's a percentage-based model, and the talent side of it, has to be much more sophisticated on the monetization of name and likeness. And so that is an interesting, we'll see where it lands thing. And
Yeah.
I do think that like, I think there is a disruption, but it feels more like a cyclical. Like I feel like once everybody settles and all these studios become a little bit more, they are what they are. I think people will kind of shift and it'll kind of have another heyday for it. But there's a lot of displaced lawyers right now, for sure.
Back to one of the questions that Renee asked, and I think you touched on it in your answer, but all of your producers and the content creators that you're representing, the multi hyphenate piece of it. I think again back to advice for our listeners when there is a pandemic, when there is a strike, when there is, name whatever the next hiccup in the industry is. What kind of advice do you give when your producers are wanting to write a book, or they're going to become, they're going to do something in gaming, or they're going to do a music video? There's just so many, everybody's kind of touching on everything. How do you navigate that with your in advice and again through work that now your one producer has 5 titles under their name?
I think that especially because I work with producers and production companies so globally, so it's very strategic about what they're doing and why. I think that every situation is different. I think that there's a multitude of factors as to why people should take risks in certain things and not. And one of the things that I challenge producers or production companies that are maybe shifting or trying something new is I really try to get a sense of, do they have an awareness of their capital exposure? Like, what is it going to take cost wise to do the things that they think they're going to do? And then there's also a lack of understanding of time. Like producers are very speculative, right? They're very entrepreneurial, but it's one thing to say they're going to go into nonfiction. It's another thing to say like, okay, well, how are you going to port all these access agreements? Do you have editors that are going to make the sizzles? Have you thought about all these? So like, it's a little bit, resource discussion wise, and like, are they really kind of thinking through the why? And part of it too is like when there's an opportunity point where two people with diverse skill sets are coming together to make something happen, whether it's a show or a book or a stage play, really understanding what each person's respective contribution is and is it realistic? Because it's one thing to say you want to make a stage play. It's another thing to say, okay, well, do you understand how it's going to get financed and who are those people that are come into it? And I'm a very, action item oriented person. So sometimes like it's great that you want to be in Broadway in a year, but like, what is the very next step? And maybe if the next step is you actually don't have the rights to this stage play because it's owned by the estate and you can never get it. Why don't we figure out that first? So I'm sort of an unpacker and like really just putting one foot in front of the other. And also because like I think that creators in general and producers can sort of get ahead of themselves. And what my job is to like almost create a flow chart of like, before I put in an infinite resource in this spec script, what do I really need to know and do the diligence on? So I'm not sort of like spinning my wheels for a year on something I can never make. So it's a little bit of like legal meets business meets resource conversation. And sometimes I'm just completely wrong, right? Like a producer could just say, I know I've never done this. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to go in my cabin and develop this with two guys. And it's going to be like the greatest thing ever. And I'm for that as well. Once I at least have my 2 cents.
I think that can be great advice for somebody starting out, or somebody that is established, and maybe it's like, exactly what's the resource spend. That could be, you have millions of dollars to spend, or you don't, but and what are you putting your time in to get started? So I think that's very valuable for whoever's listening.
The other thing too that often comes up is you have to be careful not to be too insular about your creation, because after all, creation has to meet commerce or else your parents have a trust fund. Like there's no like in between. And so I do sometimes, I want to understand from their perspective, okay, what does it look like when it's done, right? Is this on Netflix? Is this on Amazon? Is this, a wide theatrical release? And really like have the conversation of, is your expectation of how this can come to fruition a realistic one in this marketplace? And it may not be. And you just have to have that. And listen, there's always the outliers. There's always the success stories. But if you don't understand how it's actually going to come to fruition and make sure that the marketplace has a path for it, it's also a little bit of an exercise in futility.
What are common mistakes that you find? It's like, obviously you're talking about, and I think you've outlined a few of them here in terms of the last question, but what are the biggest mistakes you find when somebody comes to you and asks you for help, either with a production hat on or so forth? What makes you nervous within the industry right now of negotiation?
I don't like it when people don't listen to me. I'm not saying do what I say, but it's frustrating to work with someone who is not hearing you. And even though they may not do exactly what I'm recommending, that is also a little alarming to me, because it's a collaboration, right? Like I need to listen to my client and hear what they're saying about how they felt when they met with the person and should they do the deal. Like that, I have to listen. They need to listen to me. So listening is like a very basic skill. From my first grader to my client, I feel like when it's reciprocal, it's amazing. And when it's not, it's really frustrating for me personally. And I think that there is a lot of frustration right now in the industry, because if something is going to get made, everybody wants to make it for far less and with a lot more parameters and financial limitations. And so I think there's just an inherent friction between, okay, you're going to make it, but you're going to make it for way less money and everyone's going to get paid less and there is no upside. And like that is like a constant foundational just pain point. So like everybody's in a bad mood, even though we're making something. And I say that because during the streaming wars, everybody was in a great mood because they were making something and getting paid probably a little bit more than they should have, right?
Yeah.
And so that is a currency that impacts negotiation and flexibility and attitude around negotiation. And I think that streamers and studios and networks and then invariably financiers have less tolerance to be generous because they know the outlook of the return is contracted. And so that just causes there to be just a more frustrated exchange. And it's not as pleasant. But I always say to people like, well, at least we're making it and like, let's figure it out. And I think that I think the streamers and networks, and I think that we're all trying to figure out the next version of what upside looks like. You know, there were discussions about certain streamers talking about like what new bonuses would look like. All of that is in process and in motion. But right now people are just a little bit burnt out, right? Like the strike was so debilitating. And so everything was on hold. And I think there's a little bit of psychosis of, okay, well, I waited, so now I should make all this money. And you're like, well, no, we're making something, but nobody's making a lot of money. And so from the reps to the person creating it, no one's happy. And so I just have to deal with a lot of feelings about that.
One of the things that's popped up for us and some of the conversations that Gretchen and I have had with some producers as of late is just this offshoring of post and things along those lines. How are you finding the international markets playing beyond, the immediate?
I think that if you don't have international relationships and like a strategy that involves production throughout the world, you're going to be more and more out of relevance. So like we're very cognizant of that. Like I can count on one hand how many films I'm shooting in California right now. 2 years ago, it was dozens. Like I couldn't even have told you. And so the reality is not only is California having a major contraction on just making stuff, the US as a whole is having a major exodus. And so the relevance of Hollywood has sort of gotten further reduced, right? It used to be like all the famous people are here and everybody's making stuff here. Now it's just all the famous people, ... What is fame? What does that mean to everybody else? China doesn't really care, right? Like are here. And so for us to be relevant, we have been very cognizant of establishing and maintaining relationships. And you do have to go to Berlin. You do have to make trips to London. You do have to kind of like have an international relationship. And like for us, we affiliate with law firms that we love in other countries. And when we're shooting, you have to understand what your value proposition is, where you're not necessarily doing everything there, but like your experience and understanding of the creation of content and worldwide distribution is your value factor that has to be relevant to international production. I think, I think the UK in particular has become sort of the alternate Hollywood universe, like of all the other jurisdictions that we deal with. I think Canada production has always been what it is. It's like a lot of TV movies and lower level scripted shows, and it's relevant. But the UK in particular has been like where a lot of these studios and companies have an alter ego there and are doing real business there. And so you can't just think of it as an LA thing anymore.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I can't believe we're almost out of time. This has been so fascinating. I feel like I've just had a master class in entertainment law. I love it. Thank you so much, Elsa.
Yeah.
So with Women in Entertainment, like we've said, we have film, television, sports, broadcasts, books. We love to hear from our guests what you're loving right now. What are you watching, reading? What's your off time look like? What you're enjoying?
I try to read a couple books at a time. Sometimes I reread because I need like comfort food. So I currently am like in a very nostalgic mode. So, and my husband's like, what is going on? So I'm rereading Ram, which I read growing up. I just felt like I needed to read something good and juicy. And then I've been watching like old movies. So like I just finished My Blue Heaven with
Oh my.
Steve Martin, and I'm watching Wild Things. Like I just feel like I kind of want to. Maybe I'm having a problem with the contraction in the marketplace. Um, so I'm in a very nostalgic frame of mind. But I also just finished Nobody Wants This, which like is like an exciting version of a show that like is like it's so relatable and cool. And so I'm trying to watch new stuff too. But
Nobody Wants This is
I think
talk of
I'm
the
holding on
town.
to the past. Yeah, exactly.
Those are funny. Yeah, we
That's
we
great.
can't for the last 2 weeks. I feel like we can't get away from Nobody Wants This.
We
It's
can't.
so
It's
great.
so good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's so good.
everybody's having so much fun with it.
Yeah.
We've been joking around that like the men from the 90s or the like the early 2000s because as are having moments right now between
Yeah,
Adam
totally.
Brody, like it's
Yeah.
like they're all coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I
I
mean,
needed to watch Nobody Wants This after watching Menendez because I was like
oh yeah.
so
I've gone
disturbed
from
and like
Nobody
so
Wants This
enthralled.
to Menendez.
Oh, see that's a harder transition. Yeah, I don't know that I would do that.
It's a little bit harder. It's
Yeah.
harsh.
Yeah, it's harsh.
When you were talking about things going unscripted and scripted and the same topic, I thought you were going to bring up Menendez because it feels like I feel like there's going to be an animated Menendez announced any day now because it's just the documentary and the narrative and the real story. It's crazy. There's every version of the Menendez keep coming out every other day.
Yeah. And like that's something where user generated content and like TikTok culture has like
Yeah.
is focusing the content to be created because of what people want. And like that sort of real-time democratization of content is interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how much more Menendez stuff I can take, but
Right.
it's still good to know that
I
people are
think I'm
being
like a one
informed.
and done. I think I'm a one and done.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
lived
But at the
it
same
and
time, I'm like on my phone, like going, being like, where are the new, like, I'm going to go to
Deep
Newsweek,
dives.
these
Yeah.
Newsweek 1980, like
Yeah.
1980s
Totally.
style.
yeah.
Oh my Lord. Crazy. But also, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you
We
both.
really appreciate it. Well, she's just cool as anything.
Oh my gosh, I know. I have so many nuggets. Well, and yeah, just so many things that she talked about, but really, really interesting. Her take, on the contraction of the industry and where things are going to shake out.
I thought the international was really interesting too.
Yeah.
She's just so forward thinking of like in
Mm-hmm.
terms of strategy. And that's something
Mm-hmm.
that is fresh, in terms of like, I think we've had some guests that have come on and they just talk about like the here and now, and this is what I want to get my next project, but I think she gave such tactical advice. It was awesome.
Yeah, no, she was fantastic, and I keep every time the short form and the YouTube for the younger audience comes up, I think about Quibi and think about were
Yeah.
they ahead of their time or
I feel like it was
is it
like, the more I think about it, it's like, was Quibi just too early? Because
yeah
if you think about like Quibi, it's like, I don't know. It's interesting.
or is it unneeded because we have YouTube? I mean,
Well, I
was
think
it
YouTube Shorts, but like
yeah
it should have been an acquisition target.
exactly but I just thinking about
Yeah.
that, but no, she's absolutely thinking about what's coming ahead, what's happening in the industry, where they're seeing production go. Very, very
She also
informative, and
was
I
just
love.
generally very cool. Like she was
Yeah,
just very open, and I just feel like she's very matter of fact, which is great and refreshing in terms of just hearing what you need to hear.
right. And I loved her career advice. You do more when you care more. So her thought of, I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to do something that I really am interested in because then I'll work harder, then I'll do better. I love that. You do more when you care more.
No,
I think she'd be
100%.
fantastic with the summit. I had added, so Bob Burney just got added to the the IDA board. And so I saw it yesterday or the other day. And so I made a note that, we talked about doing another doc panel or unscripted doc, whatever it may be panel. But Elsa could be a great addition to that,
No,
being in that
absolutely.
space.
I just think that she was just like, it was just such very refreshing in terms of
Mm-hmm.
just giving our
Mm-hmm.
community advice. So guys, I hope you're listening to this, and I hope you get some really tactical, great advice. And again, she has her own law firm. She's built it, and she has some incredible clients. She's had amazing projects under her belt. So go check her out at Ramo Law.
The two places that she said to check out, the Women in Films website for their free legal advice, and then was it California Resources for the Arts?
I think so. And we can we'll double check that through, and
Yeah.
we can put those in the show notes.
Yeah, California Resources for the Arts and Women in Film that she recommended going as you're starting out.
Awesome. Well, guys, we hope you enjoyed as much as we did.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.